I think what happened is partially my fault for lying, but what happened creeped me the hell out. This happened when I was 14. I was in my emo phase, and since nobody understood me, I went online to find people to talk to. And that's where I met my boyfriend. I had been with my boyfriend for about 3 months when this happened, and we were finally going to meet each other. He lived on the other side of the country, so going with a plane would clearly be the quickest. But since we were both young and had no money, he found a cheap bus to go with. It was about Christmas time, and the roads were covered in snow, so of course the bus was late. My boyfriend sent me a text letting me know he would be late, that the bus would arrive in a bigger city 30 minutes away from the one I live in, and I had already taken the bus to pick him up, so there was no point going home. I then texted him, "Oh damn, when are you going to be here then?" "I don't know, the bus driver said he couldn't tell us yet." I told you he scammed you." "Oh, he says he'll be about 40 minutes late. Sorry, babe." "It's okay. What do you want to do when you get here?" "I want to get something to eat. I should have brought something to the bus." "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm actually really hungry right now. Would it be okay if I go get something?" "Yeah, of course, baby. What are you getting?" "I'm thinking about some Mackie D." "Fancy. You know I have no money." Then I put my phone in my pocket and walked into McDonald's. There were a lot of people in there, and I considered leaving. But I had no money to get anything better than junk food, so I bit the sour apple and stood in line. Then someone walked in and stood behind me. It wasn't anything odd, since the McDonald's I was at was often busy. But suddenly I felt something on my butt, but it quickly disappeared again. I thought it must have been a mistake, and I'm not a sensitive person, so I didn't confront them about it. But then it happened again. This time they poked me more aggressively. "Yo, what the hell?" I thought to myself. Then it happened again, and I turned around to see a guy putting his phone up to my butt. Note that I'm a very socially awkward person, and I had no idea what to say, since I had never been in a situation like this. I ended up just smiling an awkward smile, and looked at him. He was a 175 centimeter tall skinny guy, who looked like a mess. He then smiled at me, and took a step back. Must have been an accident, I thought. But then I felt his phone on my butt again. I then turned around and quietly said, "Excuse me." He just smiled like nothing had happened and said, "Hi there," in a really happy tone. I didn't even find his smile creepy, and I think that's actually what made this so scary. He sounded like a totally normal person. He kept that tone, even though what he did was super creepy. "Where are you from?" he then asked. I told him I was just from the city which we were currently in. He just looked at me with that totally normal wide smile and asked again, "Where are you from?" like he didn't understand what I said. Note that I'm not in an English-speaking country, and the conversation had been in Danish the whole time, up until what I did next. I decided I'd pretend to be someone just in case he was some weird creep, because I was honestly getting freaked out. I then began speaking to him in English, like I was not from here. "Yes, I'm from California visiting a friend." "Oh, I see," he replied, still smiling. "I am not good at English. I hope understand you." I got relieved as I realized he wasn't good at English, and I hoped he would stop and leave the conversation at that. I turned around again, and there were still at least 5 to 6 groups in front of me who had to order. So there was still a lot of time between my turn to order and now. Then I felt someone tap on my shoulder again. I turned around to look at him, and I gave him the look that said, "Please leave me alone, you creep." And he finally seemed to get it, because his wide, creepy smile began fading away. His eyes looked wild, but he still looked calm. It was a look that's hard to describe. "How old are you?" he asked. I now said something stupid that I regret saying. I should have told him I was only 14 at the time. But then he probably wouldn't have bought my story that I was in Denmark all alone. "I'm 17, I said. "Old enough to travel by yourself, but still not legal." When a creepy smile began to appear on his face, that's when I knew I'd messed up. "That's nice. And where is your friend? Where does she live? How old is she? Is she as pretty as you?" He said it and walked up to my side instead of standing behind me. He was way too close. There probably wasn't even 50 centimeters between us. I was completely speechless, because I'd never experienced something like this. This might not sound that crazy, but as a 14-year-old I was freaking out. I'm 26 myself, but that isn't a problem, is it? I just looked straight ahead, trying not to make eye contact. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he said in a cold tone. I looked at him with my emo bangs covering my face. He then began to touch my face and hair with his filthy hands. "Get that hair away from your face and look at me, baby." I looked at him, and he smiled again. That smile was making me absolutely sick, and I wanted to puke everywhere. There we go. You know I really love emo chicks. And pulled my hair away from my neck and began kissing and licking my neck. I was furious, but I was completely frozen in shock. He could see that I was getting scared. Hell, everyone could. Everyone saw that he was doing this to me, and they heard what he was saying. Yet nobody did a thing. This is an aspect of humanity which I oh so much despise. People can be so disgusting, only thinking of themselves, and not paying attention or stepping up when someone needs assistance. He came even closer and began wrapping his arms around me and said, "Come with me. We'll go get your friend." And he took my hand. I slapped his hand away and yelled at him, "I'm not a hooker." And I then ran to a place where I could be alone and called my mum crying. And when my boyfriend met up with me, he comforted me. Again, it's not a big story about how he went on and killed everyone there. I just found this extremely disturbing as a 14-year-old. I don't want to end my story with saying that what he did traumatized me so much that I never dare go into McDonald's again, because I actually plan on going there with someone later. And I don't want to end this story by saying I'll never forget the creepy smile on his face either, because that wouldn't be true. I have a medical diagnosis that means I cannot remember faces, and I'll never know if I see him again. But no matter if I remember you or not, please, let's never meet again. I am in the German Armed Forces. It was the winter of 2016. and we had heavy snowfall in an area which is rather uncommon for northern Germany, and my battalion went on a maneuver or combat drills, and after a few weeks we came back to the training grounds, and there were some old abandoned farms and training buildings around as well. We've been told the village name was Hellwich, so the whole battalion rolled in and we fought during the day and started to dig holes for night watch in the afternoon. So my platoon was on the far left flank, and the walk from the rabbit hole to the main camp was about 1.5 kilometers, or 0.9 miles. My platoon was not allowed to dig in the area, since there were burial mounds, and we basically scratched at the frozen surface and started to build snow walls. When the first night broke in, the first shift was already sitting on the fire watch and doing night watch and patrolling between the camps. We were told which shift we had to do, what the call sign was, and the frequency of the shifts. Night watch was from 2 to 4 a.m, and I got a shift with a buddy of mine. We were already CPLs at the time, so he and I went to sleep at 10 p.m, and one of the night watch guys came down to wake us up and said shift switch. So he waited while we were getting dressed. We loaded our rifles, and while you were getting dressed, we noticed more snow coming down, and I mean tons. I've never seen so much in northern Germany. When we started sneaking our way down the rabbit hole, I saw something in the woods in the corner of my eye, and brushed it off as we came to the rabbit hole where our comrade was already waiting, shaking like crazy. He said to watch out, that he thought there was a big boar in the woods or something. We brushed it off, and my buddy replied that your brain must be frozen, and that there are no animals in the area except for some small deer. So we were sitting there in the rabbit hole, looking through night vision, which wasn't working very well, because it was snowing, so we basically whispered about the day, trying to stay awake. And after about an hour and 40 minutes, my buddy told me to go to the camp to wake up the next shift. So I started to walk the way I was supposed to. But after 15 minutes, I noticed something was not right. So I pulled out my compass and checked, and it wasn't moving one bit, even though I was spinning on the spot. And I started to proceed to walk using my general sense of direction. Then out of nowhere, I heard the sound of sticks breaking and something moving in the woods. Since this was a drill, I thought it might be an enemy. I kneeled down next to a tree and watched the movements as well as I could, and used the scope of my rifle, but I could not see anything. I waited for about 2 minutes, and when I was about to stand up, I heard growls. Not like a dog, more like clicking growls. It was quite hard to explain. I'd never heard anything like that before, but I couldn't see anything. So I started to sneak towards the growl with my rifle pointed in the direction, and thought about shooting it, even though it was drill ammo. I know a loud bang would scare off any animal, and it would bolt away, but I also thought about the consequences, as my mind was playing tricks on me. So I proceeded a bit further into the woods, and then saw something moving on 4 legs, and it had a smaller, slender body, like the body that did not belong to these 2 clicking, growling noises. It was about this time, while I was kneeling, that a stick broke, and the thing made a long growl and stood up on 2 legs, and I swear it was about 2 meters tall. It was breathing relatively slowly and silently, not moving. I slowly lifted my rifle, even though I wanted to scream. I was never scared like this before, and I had the feeling that if I made the wrong move now, I would most certainly be dead. All my danger sensors were going off. It seemed like whatever this thing was did not see me turn around, making again these clicking growls when it turned back to me. I got up and was slowly retreating backwards still, looking at the thing, when it suddenly turned around, got on all fours again growling. I turned my back, and it felt like that thing was flying behind me, and I prayed that it would be away and that I could get on a new shift. My buddy and he started hissing at me like, "Dude, you've been gone 30 minutes, where have you been?" I was pointing in the direction I came from, but nothing had been there. I told them I got lost, and some supernatural animal was getting a lot closer. My buddy looked at me and said, "Let's go to sleep, man. You need it when we get to camp." I think I got my sleeping bag and rifle locked and loaded, and we were inside and couldn't sleep. I was thinking what would have happened, what I've seen, and I've done some research about German folklore, but nothing really matches with the thing I saw, and honestly, have nightmares sometimes. I even talked to a priest about it, and he told me it was a demon, and said some prayers for me, and praying with me. So please, if anyone knows what it is, I would like to know. Years ago, I used to work at a church as the head sound engineer. The bulk of that job required me to be active during the day for Sunday services. Occasionally, there were tasks that could be done whenever I got the chance. One of these tasks was duplicating CDs of sermons for people who would like a copy to listen at home or in the car. I would get requests for various sermons, sometimes series spanning months, and have to make extra time to fulfill them, since it usually took quite a while. Since I am a night owl, oftentimes I would head to the church and take care of these duplication requests in the middle of the night. It never bothered me, and I had a key to get into the church whenever I needed to. One particular night, I headed into the church sometime around 1 or 2 a.m. Since I knew the building like the back of my hand, I rarely turned the light on inside the building. The ambient light from the streetlights would illuminate through the windows just enough so that I could see where I was going. But beyond that, the building was pitch dark. Now, the way this church was laid out was that there was a foyer, which then had doors into the church sanctuary, where the services were held. The sanctuary had a balcony, and on this balcony was the sound booth, where the CD duplicator was located. There was only one door to the balcony, which could be locked from the inside, which was also located in the foyer, with a staircase leading up to it. The balcony is completely open, not separated by glass or anything, and provides a completely unobstructed view of the sanctuary below. The pews, stage, all of it. Acoustically, the room is very good. If someone was on the stage talking, you could easily hear it from the back of the church and balcony. If for some reason you couldn't see what you were listening to, you could easily make out from which part of the room the sound was coming from. This comes into play later. When I reached the top of the stairs to the balcony and the sound booth, I turned on a light so I could begin working. Just a single bulb, about 15 feet above my head. I had no need to turn on anything more than that. This was the only light in the entire sanctuary. I know that might seem crazy to some, but this was a building I had spent hundreds of hours in by myself at night. I felt completely comfortable at the time. I began duplicating CDs, lost in my thoughts and the peaceful silence of the enormous room. After about an hour or so of silence, a sound abruptly rang out that startled me, about 20 to 30 feet above and below me, in the middle of the pews on the left-hand side. I heard a distinctive clink, clink sound. It was subtle, but clear and unmistakable to me. Over and over. I knew exactly what this sound was. Let me explain. In another part of the church, we had a coffee house of sorts, where people would load up on coffee and donuts every Sunday morning. The coffee was always dispensed into ceramic coffee mugs. Literally, the most basic, commonly used mug you can imagine. Your kitchen cupboards are likely full of them. Anyway, due to the high volume of these mugs that circulated through the church, there were always baristas from the coffee house picking them up from around the church to be washed. Oftentimes, they would miss mugs, and they would lay hidden around the church. As multiple mugs were usually collected in one hand by the handle, mugs themselves would hit and make that very distinctive ceramic clink. It became regular background noise before, during and after services, and after about 10 years of working at this church, it's a sound I knew and recognized very well. But I would be lying if I said I ever conscientiously thought about that particular sound. So I find myself trying to process why I'm hearing coffee mugs clinking together in the middle of the night, in the middle of our church sanctuary, in the pitch dark. I stood there peering from the balcony into the darkness below, trying to make sense of it for several minutes, before curiosity got the better of me. I had to figure out what was making that sound. I descended the stairs and into the foyer, where the light switches were, and flipped them all on to the on position. I immediately felt a little better, and entered the sanctuary on the ground level. I had pinpointed where the ceramic sound was coming from when I was on the balcony, but unfortunately, now that I was at the source with the lights on, there was nothing to be heard. It was midweek, but the sanctuary had not yet been cleaned from the previous Sunday, so I knew there was still probably a few coffee mugs inside. People frequently left them on top or underneath of pews, and everywhere in between. I walked down each row of pews, carefully scanning for mugs. Nothing. Knowing there would likely be some on the floor, I got down on my hands and knees in the very front of the sanctuary so that I could take a peek. From this perspective, I could see underneath every pew of each respective side at once. Sure enough, there were a few mugs scattered through the floor and underneath certain pews. I got up and moved to those specific pews and examined where each mug was. In hindsight, I probably should have just picked them up. I didn't, because technically it wasn't my job. But I did take note of the most important fact at the time. There were no coffee mugs in close proximity to each other. The closest were 3 or 4 feet from another mug, not even remotely close enough to clink together. While I couldn't explain the sound I heard, there was no logical way that those mugs could have made those sounds. I had no answers, but I was satisfied enough to just brush it off. I left the sanctuary, turned off the lights at the light switch in the foyer, and returned back up the stairs to the balcony, illuminated by a single light bulb above me. and consoled by the silence I found myself in once again. I resumed my tasks, and about 15 minutes passed before it happened again. Clink. In the same place as before. My heart stopped, and the hairs on my neck stood up once more. Okay, I had verified this myself. There were no mugs in enough proximity that they could somehow, for the sake of argument, be clinking on their own. They were not clinking on their own. I rushed down the stairs into the foyer and flipped on the lights once again, entering the sanctuary. I dropped to my knees once more and peered under the pews. Nothing. I knew this sound. It was unmistakable. I pinpointed where it was coming from, but there was nothing. No sound, nothing in disarray, no mugs that could be in any contact with each other. Spooked, but frustrated at the same time, I returned to the foyer. Instead of turning off all the lights, I left one on in the sanctuary. This made for 2 lights now, one in the balcony and one in the sanctuary. The addition of this light helped set me a little more at ease as I walked through the balcony door at the bottom of the stairs. I locked it from the inside. I didn't know what was going on, and maybe I was being a little paranoid at this point, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I went up the stairs once again to finish my tasks on the balcony, and just about a half hour of silence had elapsed. It was just enough for me to settle into the idea of nothing weird happening for the rest of the night. Then it happened again. It might as well have been a gunshot. I stood up and scanned from atop the balcony. There was twice as much light in there now, and enough to illuminate the room, even if it was still dim. But there was nothing. Nobody was playing a prank. There were no ghouls, spectres, or shadow people dancing around. No big, aha, revelation. The sound continued, and so did I. I wanted to go home, so I ignored it. The sooner I finished duplicating these CDs, the sooner I could get out of this damn church and get some sleep. The sound continued, again and again. Maybe another 15 minutes, maybe another half an hour. I lost track of time. All I know was that eventually, it stopped. The silence returned. At one point, I resolved that all of this was ridiculous. There had to be a rational explanation, and as such, it was stupid to hold up on my locked balcony. I went downstairs to get something to drink. On my way back, I flipped off that remaining light in the sanctuary. No need to waste electricity. I reasoned, I'm not going to let some stupid sound dictate fear all night. I returned to the balcony and left the door unlocked, illuminated once more by my single bulb, and I popped in a few more CDs. Then it happened. I don't even know how to effectively describe it, at least in a way that captures the immediacy and sheer terror of it. All at once, the entire room began to shake violently, with a deep, bassy rumble. There are no earthquakes in this part of the country, so that was immediately ruled out. Time seemed to stop as I scanned around the room trying to figure out what was going on. I looked at the soundboard. You know those LEDs they have going from green to yellow to red? The thing was maxed out in the red, indicating it was overloaded by some input. But there were no mics plugged in, no amps turned on, and no sound coming out of the speakers. I don't even think the speakers were plugged in, and if they were muted. At the time, I had done professional audio for over 5 years, and this wasn't something technical. The entire sanctuary rumbled and shook for about 30 seconds, and then it stopped. Complete silence. I was completely shaken, and I bolted out of the church and went home. I don't have any explanation for what happened, since there were no ghostly things to show themselves or anything super paranormal. I've tried to explain it with logic, but alas. I live in a pretty sizable town near a major city. In my town, there's train tracks that are still pretty active to this day that I still wait on my way home. Anyway, there's a part where the highway in my town and the railroad intersect, and near there is an abandoned prison. It's been there before I was ever born, but pretty much out of sight, and not many people knew about it. My friends knew about it, because one of them was active in urban exploration, and has explored abandoned factories and buildings of the sort in the major cities near our town. So, when he heard there was a place we can explore right here in our town, we jumped at the opportunity and decided to go with a team of 3. Me, a childhood friend, and the urban explorer. It was my first time going on something like this, and I was pretty excited. But when I found out how to get there, it was pretty sketchy. See, the railroad that's near that prison is also near a neighborhood that was made with a fairly new development at around 2010. To get to the prison, we had to park in the cul-de-sac of this neighborhood and walk past a ditch into the flat area of undeveloped land. There's a ton of high grass obstructing the dirt road to the prison, but it was evident that there was indeed a path because of multiple no trespassing signs and the like, warning us not to go in. We ignored these signs and walked the path for what seemed like 2 miles. After the path, there was just flat land, and we could see a concrete road extending out to greet us, but still short by a couple of yards. When we got into the main part of the prison, I saw an overgrown greenhouse that was maybe used to store things, some guard towers with barbed wire around them, and smaller houses that I think may have been used as classrooms or infirmaries perhaps. We decided to explore different houses one by one, starting with the classroom. It was gutted of all furniture, but had a blackboard with names written on it. Seeing those names gave me chills that never left me the entire time I was there. But what sealed the deal was the storage room in the back. I never said anything to my friends at the time, but I felt as if something was there looking back, yet I couldn't see it because there was no light, as we left for the prison in the late afternoon. Considering the walk it took to get there, we started exploring near night. It gave me the creeps, and I stayed outside while they decided to explore, but those names on the board wouldn't get out of my head, and it made the feeling more authentically knowing that there were people at one point. If they were alive or dead, God only knows. We ventured further into the prison yard and found that we were surrounded by small brick houses with furniture thrown out front. Going into them, we found much of the same: broken glass, graffiti, drawers full of documents with names and other personal information. The most interesting thing we found were the firecrackers and fast food wrappers. But as interesting as it was equally disturbing because it showed us signs that people had been here recently. All I could hope for is that they had the same intent as us. Now all of this was normal up to the point that something struck a chord with me. In a small house we explored, there was a broken tile on the floor, and peeking out of it was a document. I picked it up and thought nothing of it at the time, but when I put it back down and walked out the house, the energy of that place felt odd. It's something that happened to me before, and I can't convince you to believe me, but you have to take my word. But sometimes when I interact with items, I get weird feelings about them. It happened to me with my family keepsake, and the same thing happened in this instance. The way I can describe it is that it's a feeling of melancholy. Something sad happened here, but also I feel that it is not intending ill will. Whatever it is, it allowed us to keep exploring as long as we intended to keep things as they are, and it actually wants the story to be heard. The prison shouldn't be kept so hidden, as actions are needed to either take or preserve the story of it, or put it to better use. I didn't say anything to my friends, because I wanted to keep the adventure light-hearted, but they obviously knew I was being reserved after that. I was trying to be respectful of the energy there, because I knew the minute someone screwed around that this energy would snap. It was getting pretty late at this point, and all that was left to explore was the prison building itself. The main hall wasn't interesting, pretty much gutted of all furniture and empty rooms. But it did have the original wood intact, which is cool to see. Walking further down, there was a hall with the local government logo from decades ago. But at least, that's what I think, because it looked drastically different from what country it is. The striking part was that I swear that there was a gang graffitied on the wall, from pretty big gangs that are commonplace in the US and parts of South America. I thought it wasn't too strange, but after all, this place was secluded and pretty much anything could go down here. But it also meant that at any point people could show up, and who knows what might happen next. Next to the graffiti was probably the thing that scared me the most, a detailed pentagram. While saying this, I have found pictures of the walls that people had taken recently, but the pentagram wasn't among the graffiti. I wouldn't be surprised if a ritual went down here, but at this point I'm hoping it wasn't a sacrifice or spell or anything. We reached the end of the hall and were stopped by a locked bar door. You know, like one of those old Western movie type ones? Well, my urban explorer friend, being the idiot he is, handed me the camera and said, "Take a pic of me pretending to be stuck behind bars. It'll be funny." And right when he stepped to pull the bars and position his face, a loud crash reverberated from the prison. A giant glass window shattered from deeper in, and we couldn't necessarily see it because the door was locked. Not like they were trying to investigate it anyway. At that point, I felt the energy again. It wasn't mad, but definitely felt as if the peace wasn't the same. Maybe it was mad at my friend. Pretty much mocked the prisoners that used to live here, and the names of the people on the documents, and the names on the blackboard, and all of that. But I felt no ill will towards me. I just felt like whatever protection we were given before, we had lost it now. And all I could mutter was, "Let's go, guys. I don't feel safe." And we'd left. Walking back on the beaten path, I felt as though there was something seeing us out of the prison, waiting for us to leave. But when I looked back, I saw nothing. The whole feeling washed over me again. Melancholy, sadness, as if to say the energy wanted me to not completely abandon it. We got back to the car, and I recalled what I felt to my friends, but they didn't believe it. And they recounted how cool it was to see old documents and equipments used in prisons. But for me, I was relaxed kinda. My mum likes museums a lot, but that one required respect for the exhibits being displayed. That night, I decided to look deeper into the story of the prison and take a quick Google search, which auto-corrected my initial query with haunted prison. Well, there you have it. There was a Wikipedia page that also gave more background info on the person, and turned out the story was way deeper than I thought. The prisoner here was mainly African American. It was opened in 1909, during a time when Reconstruction affected much of the US. Some federal worker was conducting an excavation and found a human bone that was not recent, and it led to a burial ground with more than 95 bodies. I worked overnight security in one of the largest, best, and oldest hospitals in the US. My fellow security officers and I all have stories about one building in particular, but the one that I'll tell is the only one that happened to me. Backstory for the building. It was built in the late 1800s. It was the original psychiatric building for this hospital. Now, being built in the late 1800s, not much was truly known about psychiatric disorders. On top of that, this hospital was known for its medical research. With both those facts combined, you can infer that some terrible stuff was done to these misunderstood psych patients in this building. A couple of years before I started working security there, this building had been converted into offices after the newly built part of the hospital dedicated a section for an updated psych ward. Here is my story. My rounds for that night happened to include said building. At night, this building was empty, due to recently being converted into offices and the drones who worked there wanting to leave at 5, if not earlier. In some of their haste, they left their office doors unlocked, which is a big no-no, due to medical information being located in their offices. It was our duty to go to each floor and make sure that every door was locked, and if it wasn't, to secure it ourselves. I did my initial sweep of the building to make sure that it was clear, and proceeded to do my door-to-door checks. The hallways were pretty narrow, so I could check both sides of the hallway doors at once. At the end of this hallway, there were 2 sets of doors you had to go through to reach the final office, which was a dead end. Everything was secure. Awesome. Time for the next floor. I exited the 2 sets of doors from the dead-end office and stood absolutely frozen from what I saw. Every door ajar, set perfectly so their own weight wouldn't cause them to shut again, and 1 wheelchair at the end of said hallway, facing towards the steps. I had heard other security officers outright reject that set of rounds due to strange stuff happening there, but I laughed it off until that night happened. I never took those rounds again. The old children's ICU is currently under construction to be turned into medical labs, so we have to patrol the area. Once again, to make sure the area is secure, or to report if the contractor / foreman stayed to plan for the next day. When patrolling this area, several security officers have reported seeing a single white male child of around the age of 5 to 7 with short brown hair. Think 90s bowl cut. I personally dismissed this, as this was before the psych ward incident, as a tall tale with the intent to scare me because I was new at the time. I got that building's patrol one night, and a foreman who stayed late called security and asked for a security officer to come up because a kid locked himself in a room. And I don't want him to get hurt with all the open wires in there, or something to that effect. I unlocked the door for him, looked in what can only be described as a 10 by 8 room for about 10 minutes, and there was no kid. I called it in as a false alarm, and finished my patrol. My third story. I had a special detail, aka babysitting a violent psych patient along with another security officer. He woke up in the middle of the night, recognized the other officer and said hello. He sees me and immediately started screaming at me for me not to hurt him. Now, I'm a rather large gentleman, at 6'2" and 250 pounds, but I'm not trying to make myself too intimidating around psych patients as not to escalate the situation. Well, he keeps screaming for me not to hurt him, and he says if I promised not to, he would make something good happen for me. I promise, and he calms down, goes back to sleep, and I forget about it. The next day, I got a permanent set of rounds and a pretty good promotion. Easily a coincidence, but interesting nonetheless. Final story. Fellow security officers had rounds in the aforementioned psych building and heard a call on the radio in what could only be described as a dry throat voice of terror for one officer for backup. I was close, so I responded to his call, letting him know I was on his way. When I got there, he had his head between his knees and was silently crying with a shattered chandelier a couple of feet away from him. Now, before I had experienced the abnormal happenings in this building, I would have written off his testimony off as idiocy. But he claimed that something held him in that spot as the chandelier started to swing wildly until it started to fall. When it started to fall, he was let go and allowed to move, and scrambled out of the way before he was hit. I got him up, calmed him down, and took him back to the supervisor. She yelled to one of our other supervisors, almost lost another one to that building. The other supervisor laughed and said, "Why do you think we send the new guys? You know I don't even like going over there." That guy is my roommate, and hates it when I bring up that experience. So, this is an ongoing situation, but it just went from annoying to seriously creepy. There's a maintenance guy at the office building I work at. He is hired through the landlord of the building, not our company. We'll call him Bob. Bob is an older guy, maybe late 50s, and a former heroin addict. I say former because we are all pretty sure Bob still occasionally indulges in the habit. He is very socially awkward, and his mannerisms and ways of speaking are strange. He talks really slowly and pauses in places where pauses don't make any sense. or trails off mid-sentence. He also gets super close when he talks to you and makes intense eye contact, or stares at me through our huge front window that happens to be in front of my desk. So overall, mildly creepy guy. He has done some weird things in the past, like given me his personal number, brought a co-worker a $200 wedding gift, and had it delivered to her, as I work with all women. The staring at people through the window, and he gave me a toy riding horse thing for my son. The kind that's on springs that rocks back and forth, and asks me personal questions about my marriage, and tried to ask me if I'd go on a date with him. I also found my car door open, and a bunch of my stuff, like paperwork and some perfume, and makeup I keep in my center console, moved around once when he was here. Today, he comes into the front office and just kind of stands there after saying hi. I ask my co-worker if I can go out and have a smoke, and she says yes. I go get into my car and kept the door cracked so I could smoke. I was parked under a covered carport thing outside the back door, across from the utility/supply room. All of a sudden, Bob is standing there and kind of grabs the door and opens it a bit. I don't know where he came from, but I was listening to music, so wasn't really paying attention. I took my headphones out and looked at him, like, what? He doesn't answer right away, then asks me if I can take him to the store. A, he has a big white truck that he knows I know he has. And B, he knows damn well I can't just leave while I'm working. I tell him that, and he goes, No, it's okay. I already asked the co-worker and she was fine with it. I ask him why he can't just drive himself, and he sits there for a second, looking at me, and then asks me to help him with something in the utility room. I say no, and that I need to get back to work before I'm yelled at. He stared for a minute, and then smiles the creepiest smile and says, No, you won't. They think you've taken me to the store. We have plenty of time. I don't know if I'm accurately conveying the creepy, scary vibe he was putting off, but I was scared at this point. I didn't know what he wanted, or what he was trying to accomplish, but it wasn't anything good. And on top of that, he wasn't moving out of my way, and was about 6 inches away from me. I tell him to move, and he stands there for a few seconds and finally does. I dialed 911 on my cell and jumped out of the car and ran inside. I seriously thought he was going to grab me and push me into the utility room or something. I'm still in shock about it. Oh, and he didn't ask my co-workers anything about the store. Of course, he made that up. He left right after that whole thing, and I don't really know what to do about this situation. I was around 17 and had gotten home from work rather late. I went straight to my room to change and found myself hungry. It was probably around 1 a.m, but I didn't want to cook anything and make too much noise, as I was afraid I'd wake the parents. So when I ventured to my kitchen, I started shuffling through the cupboards, looking for a quick fix of a snack to tide me over until the morning. Now, our kitchen was in a position so that the kitchen door led to the backyard. The door itself was an old wooden door, but my dad had added one of those metal security gate/screen doors on the outside for good measure. It was one of the security gates where the holes on the door were small enough so that insects could not get through, and therefore we could leave the wooden door open in the summer to allow for a breeze to go through the house. In addition to the security door, my dad had also installed one of those auto security lights. You know, the ones that go on automatically when their motion sensor is triggered. Usually the light would only go on when I would let my dog outside at night to pee. However, on this night, he was already lounging in my room, waiting for me to come back with some snacks for him as well. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I was busy creeping through the cupboards and finally hit the jackpot with some Pop-Tarts. Knowing my dog, I didn't want to chance him snagging the tart from my hand as I ate it, so I opened them up and started munching on them in the kitchen. As I'm standing there eating the first Pop-Tart, I hear a faint whistling sound from outside, as the wooden door was open. At first I thought it was the wind, but then I noticed that the whistling was a distinct tune, not random whistling. I didn't know the tune, but I could tell it was from a song. It sounded like a happy and sad song all rolled into one. After standing there for about 20 seconds, I decided that it must be one of my friends that lives down the block that's trying to mess with me. Maybe they were on the other side of the fence and whistling there to scare me. Right when I'm thinking this, I see the security lights suddenly turn on. I quickly looked around the surrounding area, but I don't see anyone or anything that could have set the light off, and the whistling persists. Now I'm in semi-panic mode. Is it one of my friends? If so, where are they hiding? If it's not one of them, who is it? I am stuck standing there now, and can't move as I stare outside waiting for something to happen. Nothing does. A minute or two goes by, with the whistling continuing and the light remaining on. Suddenly the whistling gets louder, and I see the doorknob to my metal door start moving up and down, and I can see through the metal door to see there's no one there. The whistling sound is now right outside, and the doorknob keeps moving like someone's trying to get in. The security light is on, and I still have a clear view of the front of the door, and know that someone is trying to get in. Screw the Pop-Tarts. I dropped the box and jetted back to my room, slammed and locked the door and hid under my blankets, with a baseball bat and dog. I never went out to the kitchen at night after that. So this happened a little over 2 years ago now, and I wanted to share it. It was 2016, and I had just started a new job at a motel. It was low pay, but I needed an office job. One of my friends, Michael, got me the job. For a few days I did training with the owner in the mornings. For 2 nights, Michael trained me. Our job was the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. Nothing exciting, checking guests in and doing paperwork. My boss, the owner, went away with his wife on vacation for a week, which is attributed to the swift training I had to endure. So it was my first night alone on the night shift. There was a monitor with security cameras around the motel's property, and large glass windows all around the office building, with a glass door. There was no night windows like most motels have. It was fairly eerie in the night, at about 1 a.m. I was just doing my normal check-in paperwork, when a man walks in and asks if we have any rooms available. Usually if someone is sketchy, my boss told me to lie and say no, but he seemed normal. Without hesitation I said, "Yes, of course, just for one." And he replies yes. So I begin creating the reservation on the computer, when I notice he starts swatting the air and making spitting noises, as if he's being surrounded by flies. I tried to ignore it. As far as I was concerned, it wasn't my business, so I check him into the room as quickly as possible. I give him his key, and he's on his way. At this point in time, I could be described as very timid. I had a lot going on in my personal life, so I hope you can all understand my reaction to what happened next. The man comes back from his room and slams his hand on the glass door and causes me to jump. Absolutely frightened, I look up to see him just staring at me. He cracks the door and puts his head through and says, "I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me into my room?" And my only defense is trying to be helpful, so I reply, "Maybe there's something wrong with your key. Let me give you another one." The look he had in his eyes was inexplicable. I felt like I was in absolute danger. I handed him his new key, and he went back to his room. I tried texting Michael because he was the one who trained me, though it was the middle of the night and he was asleep. I just needed some guidance. With no reply from Michael, I noticed the man trudging down the stairs to come back. I go into absolute panic mode. I run into the back office and lock the door, and I pull out my pocket knife. It's important to keep protection when working at night. I hear the man in the office yelling, "Hello? Why won't you let me into my room? Don't you like me?" Me being an idiot, and not standing my ground, and calling the police when I feel scared, I decided to take the situation on alone, and I replied, "I'm just on the phone, I'll be right out." I then start calling Michael over and over, with no answer, and decide to take a few deep breaths and then step out of the office. The man wasn't there. He was in the bathroom. I start hearing him talking to himself angrily, saying, "Kill her, kill her." My heart sank. Still being an idiot and not calling the police, he comes out and I say, "Your key was broken. I'm sorry, let me escort you to your room." He agrees, thankfully. I was wearing a long-sleeved sweater, so with my arms down, I was able to hide my knife as I was holding it. I begin to walk outside, and he seems insistent to walk behind me. We begin making our way to the staircase and up towards his room. I was sweating from how nervous I was, continuously looking behind me to make sure he wasn't going to make a move. He stops at a room, and I stop at his room a few doors down, and I smile and say, "Oh, that's the wrong room. This is your room," as it clearly said on the door. The whole time he was going into someone else's room and trying to open the door. I felt bad for them. I quickly ran back to the office and locked the door. The next guest I checked in was a police officer from a few towns away. I felt bad for confiding in them about the guy, but they seemed willing to keep an eye out and an ear out. The next night the man came back, but I had the doors locked and told him we were all booked up. I explained to my boss what happened when he got back from vacation. However, he didn't take me seriously. I continued to work the night shift there for the next year. There were many other strange encounters, but strange man, please, let's not meet. And if you ever feel uncomfortable, always call the police. A few weeks ago, our car got broken into, and we had left some cash out there. That's all that was taken from us. We called the police and put it out of our minds. We live on base housing, though it's not actually on base, so the people who responded were the military police, and they said there was nothing they could do. Then a few nights ago, Monday or Sunday going into Monday, I had woken up and went to get him a sippy cup with water. I heard car doors bang shut. From my living room, I could look out the window and see the car. The lights were on. I was half asleep and decided to go outside. Stupid, I know. I opened the front door, and there's a glass screen door between the two. On the other side of the screen is a man in a hoodie. I freeze, not really sure what to do, and the guy looks just as surprised. "Can I get some food?" he finally asks. I tell him no, and he reaches to open the door. I slam it shut and lock it. At this point, my husband gets up to see what's going on, and I tell him to call the MPs again, who say there was nothing they could do since nothing happened. My husband thankfully hasn't had to work nights yet, but last night and the night before, there was banging on my bedroom window. I recently put curtains up, so I didn't dare get up to check. They've also been slamming on the outside door that houses our AC unit. I'm pretty sure it's the same person that tried to rob our house. When I was younger, I used to work as a security guard in the Louvre, where the Mona Lisa is. I worked the day shift, which was my part-time student job, and I heard some spooky stories from the night shift crew. There was this corridor with swords on both sides, and this security guard was walking by with his torch, and suddenly something pulled his jacket that made him almost fall. He turned around and nothing was there. He was screaming down the walkie-talkie that someone had to go and bring him to the main room. They checked the cameras and saw that his jacket just got pulled mid-air. The next day, when they reported it to the chief of security, he told them to disregard this, and since that day, they always do their rounds with 2 guards. There are so many more stories of that place. We should not forget, many people have died in there of violent deaths. I was riding around on my bike in winter, looking for places to explore. My hometown was a big industrial East Coast city, known for their brass manufacturing. In the southern portion of the city, there were lots of factories, and where there are factories, there are houses for the workers. Across the street from a brass works I had visited dozens of times, I noticed a house that was very vacant and obviously abandoned. It was 3 stories tall, with asphalt siding, shingles coloured in a deep red, brown, beige, colours that screamed 1970s. The first 2 floors had every window busted out, and even had the sash weight from the windows ripped out and scavenged for the scrap iron. But the 3rd floor, all the windows were intact. Intrigued, I made my way into the building. Very easy to do. Not only were there no windows, there were no back doors either. Only the front door remained. Walking through the building was not easy though, because the entire apartment was covered waist deep in garbage bags. Eventually I made my way to the stairwell and got up to the 2nd floor. I was met with the same situation. The entire apartment filled with garbage. I worked my way up to the back porches, where there are usually stairs connecting all 3 floors. This proved to be the case, and I wound up my way to the 3rd floor porch. When I got up there, I tried the door and found that it was locked. But as soon as I looked away from the door, I saw that someone had taken a heavy-duty orange extension cord and grafted it to the power lines coming from the nearby telephone poles. The cord had obviously been there a while, because the part of the cord that was exposed to the sun had bleached a pale yellow. The rest of the dingy orange cord went into the house through a hole drilled in the wall. So I thought to myself, okay, this place might have power. Interesting. Since I couldn't open the back door, I went back to the second floor apartment and waded through the trash until I found the stairs to the third floor in the front of the building. I followed the stairs up, and as I approached the door, I started to feel that something wasn't right. It was warm, not just because I was out of the winter wind and in an enclosed space. It was full warm. It was physically warmer. I approached the door and turned the knob slowly with my gloved hand. I made no noise, but it turned completely. As I slowly pushed the door open, as quietly as I could, I was hit with a blast of heat that fogged up my glasses. Inside the cracked open door, I could see that there was indeed power. As I opened the door the rest of the way, I found myself in a kitchen with eaten food on the table, used and a still smoking cigarette in a cup, and a gas kitchen stove with all 4 burners on high. That explained the heat. I stood in the middle of the kitchen and looked around. Since it was an attic apartment, it was very small. The kitchen was no more than 10 by 10, and because of the staircase leading into it, the room was shaped like an L. There was a living room off the side that was darkened, a single bathroom, and to my left towards the front of the house was a single bedroom. It was there that I heard sounds. People talking. I stood still in the doorway listening for a minute, until I realized that I was hearing Judge Judy. I worked my way towards the bedroom and could see the television playing in the corner through the partly opened doorway. When I reached the doorway, I opened it slightly and looked inside, ready to run if I saw someone in there. I didn't, but what I saw was kind of worse. The bedroom was barely larger than the bed it was in. The television was crammed into the corner, stacked on top of some milk crates. There was some damaged computer speakers and other electricals that could tell had been salvaged from the dumpster behind Office Max. Being somewhat of a veteran dumpster diver myself, there were more than one set of speakers. Some even had subwoofers with them. But there was also an old VCR stacked inside the crates, with cables going both into the TV and into the other corner of the room. I followed the cables and found more crates filled with camera batteries and chargers, and an old TEAC CD/DVD duplicator. And on top of the top crate was a semi-bent tripod. Things were starting to click at this point, but turning back to the bed clenched it for me. The bed had no blankets, only a single pillow and a bedsheet on a mattress, a sheet that had red splotches towards the center of it. As I turned to start heading back, I noticed handcuffs hanging off the bedpost. That was it. I walked as quietly but as quickly as possible back down the stairwell, and instead of going through the apartments below again, I took it straight down to the bottom floor, where I found the front door unlocked. I got out of there as fast as I could, took my bike, and rode off with a sigh of relief. 3 months later, the house burnt down. If you're from England, more notably around London, you may have heard of the Croydon cat killer. This asshole lures cats towards him, and then he brutally kills them. They even remove the microchips and place the body near the family home so that the shock level is higher. I don't live in Croydon. I live in an area in the southeast of London, and I have 2 cats. A couple of days ago, a road away from mine, someone stumbled on the remains of a black cat missing its head in a skip. Some people believed it to be foxes, even though I don't. I don't know many foxes who carry knives around with them and are able to cut clean lines. The police are even pushing this off in Croydon as foxes. The cat was taken to our local vet, and the vet there determined it was done by a person and not another animal. Then the police finally took notice down here. Only, I always call my cats from the back garden when it's dinner time, as my house backs onto a different but very close alleyway. And tonight when I shouted for my oldest cat, Alfie, I heard a few seconds later, Alfie, from the alleyway. My cats are both with me currently, and they aren't leaving anytime soon. To the sicko, who wasn't shown enough love as a child by mummy or daddy, know that if I ever catch you, I will skin you and hang you from a tree, with your minuscule little member hanging out of your mouth. I promise. And just to let everybody know, Snarl have investigated and are continuing to investigate this, and have also confirmed that this was done by a person and no fox. I really hope that he gets caught soon enough. Creeps like this shouldn't be allowed to walk the streets. As a teenager, I would frequently experience numerous paranormal events, the spookiest of which happened when I was 19. My grandfather and father also experienced similar things, but on this occasion, me and my father experienced the same thing together. We used to walk together and went to a client site, a pharmaceutical company, late at night. No one was there, and everything was locked up. We entered the premises and sat in the same office working on 2 different PCs, and we immediately locked up behind us, so there was no way that anyone could enter behind us. After a half hour of working, suddenly me and my dad look at each other at the exact same time, and I could see the goosebumps on his arm from where I was sitting. I felt a deep chill across my entire body, and had goosebumps all over me. We both looked at the doorway, and there stood a lady in a long white dress. There were no feet. She was floating, and had a sort of featureless face. She shifted out of view down the hall, and we promptly got up and peered down the hall, and there was nothing. A few moments later I heard a woman's voice call my name, and at that exact moment, my dad yelped, "Did you hear that?" I thought I heard someone call my name, and we got the hell out of there very quickly. It's 2013, and I am a freshman in college. I'm living on campus with one roommate in the girls' dorm, so everything is pretty chill for the first semester. Typical college dorm things. Well, our room had actually not been used in a very long time, if ever. It was used as a showroom, but our freshman class was so big that they had to convert it into actual living space. The Wi-Fi didn't even work in there, so I spent many nights in the laundry room across the hall scrambling to finish forgotten homework due at midnight. Anyway, we leave for Christmas break and come back in January of 2014. My roommate had gotten there about 30 minutes before me and had left her stuff on the bed with the door locked, while she went to say hey to some other girls down the hall. I got there, unlocked the door, and promptly discovered that someone had trashed our room. Her suitcases were flung everywhere. My drawers were open. Our beds weren't made anymore, and even the ceiling tiles were moved out of place. One had even fallen down onto my bed. So I call my roommate and tell her it's totally not cool to trash the room, and she is subsequently very confused. She comes back and is just as confused as I am, saying she had only been in the room to drop off her bags and then she had left. Well, we asked the RA, and nobody could have possibly gotten into our room, and blah blah blah. Okay, fine, whatever. So as the semester goes on, things take a turn for the freaky. It started out with small things, like noises in the middle of the night coming from different corners of the room. But it's a college dorm. There's bound to be noises. But from inside the room? Strange, but explainable. Then about 2 weeks later, we're both dead asleep about 2 a.m. The dorm is quiet. It's a Christian college, so there's lights out and a curfew. And I'm startled awake by something being flung across the room. My roommate wakes up, wondering why I had chosen this particular time to throw crap around our room. So I promptly turned on the light. So just to give you a visual, our room was rectangular in shape. Our beds were arranged to an L shape. Her bed was parallel to the top portion of the room, so one side of her bed was against the wall. Our mini fridge was against the wall between our beds, and my bed is along the long wall. There was open space in the middle, and a built-in desk flanked on either side by small closets made more like shelves. On the other long wall, and then the door at the very end of the long wall. Above my roommate's bed, there was a shelf, and on that shelf was a stuffed animal, a Febreze odor spray thing that ran on batteries, that had been out since first week of school, as the batteries are expensive, and a plastic cup with the school logo on it. Well, upon inspection, we discovered what was flung. It was the odor spray thing from the top shelf. Odd, since it had been there since the first week of school this semester, and had never been knocked off. We assumed that it was some sort of air conditioning malfunction, even though nothing else ever moved, and there weren't any vents near the shelf. Logically, there would have had to have been some substantial force for that thing to fly across the room and land on the floor at my bed, a good 7 to 8 feet away. So we go back to bed. For the next couple of months, this thing periodically flies off the shelf. I also noticed that during this time, my roommate started acting sort of strange. She was tired and moody, and didn't seem like herself. One night I woke up with this awful feeling of dread. I noticed something moving out of the corner of my eye in the darkest corner of the room by the door. I turned my head to see a little better, thinking perhaps it was my roommate. It was not my roommate. It was like a shadow, but solid, hunched next to the door as if ready to pounce. It rocked back and forth on its feet a little, like a person trying to keep their balance, ready to spring. I kept my eyes on it and called out to my roommate. It stopped teetering when I spoke, but it was still there. It was watching me, and I could feel it. It took about 3 times of saying to my roommate for her to respond. I think there's... I didn't really know how to explain what I was looking at. She sleeps facing the wall every night, so I knew she wasn't looking at the thing. Then she whispered, "Do you see it?" My blood ran cold. I assumed it was a trick of the light, but I had woken her for confirmation that I was just seeing things. But instead she stayed facing the wall, refusing to roll over. I sacked up and looked away from the thing hunched in the corner and turned my lamp on top of the mini fridge on. I looked back and it was gone. My roommate finally sat up and turned to look at me. She proceeded to tell me that she had been seeing it most nights after I fell asleep, since the first time this spray thing had been flung across the room. She generally stayed up a bit later than me, as she was a nursing major and had tons of homework to get done. I was normally asleep by 10. She had been seeing this thing for months and said nothing. After that incident, I had the idea to keep a small light on at night and use my laptop to film whatever was going on, specifically how the spray thing was getting flung across the room. Coincidentally, the night incident stopped any night we decided to film. However, there was one night my roommate woke me up from her bed, telling me that she could hear the spray thing scraping across the shelf, about to be flung. So I sat up and was messing with my phone, not facing her bed. She was standing at the desk, turning on the laptop to start filming, also not facing her bed. We both then hear a thud, and look at each other, and then turn around to see the spray thing, sitting positioned perfectly on her bed, with the light flashing on it, despite it having no batteries. We calmed down, started the laptop, and went back to bed after putting the air thing back on the shelf, assuming all would be well since we were taping. We didn't wake up again that night. The next morning I woke up to find my laptop in a different position than I had left it. We went back through the video and saw that over the span of 10 minutes, my laptop had been mysteriously rotated towards the wall, making our beds out of view. I then proceeded to go over to my boyfriend's at the time, who was an engineering major, to show him proof I had that something was happening. He had been rather skeptical, only believing that we believed something was happening, and that we were scared. When I went to open the video, it played 2 minutes, and the rest was gone. All of the video but the first 2 minutes were just gone. It showed us turning on the video, getting ready for bed, turning off the lights, my roommate rolling over and putting in music, which she had apparently been doing since the beginning to block out noises, as the thing made noises in the corner when it moved. Me setting my alarm and rolling over to face the wall, and then nothing. I was very distraught, and in order to placate me, my boyfriend came to my dorm room on open house, which was conveniently that night, and another of our engineering friends. They spent the entirety of the allotted time trying to replicate how the spray thing might have ended up on the other side of the room, and also sitting perfectly in the center of my roommate's bed. They couldn't figure out how that would happen, and insisted we must be missing something. This carried on for the entire semester. We didn't tell anybody else about the strange happenings, but still our friends felt uncomfortable when we left them alone in our room while hanging out. Finally, the semester ended, and we went home for the summer. The spray thing sat happily on my shelf in my bedroom at home with no problems, completely forgotten. I lived with my same roommate in the next semester, eager to see her after summer break, only to discover that she was not quite the same person after our experience in the freshman dorm. She did not sleep. I didn't notice at first, but after a couple of weeks I picked up on the fact that she couldn't sleep. She looked tired and stressed and perhaps sick. Her grandma finally convinced her to see a doctor, who told her she was suffering from insomnia, which had been induced by the stress of college. We both knew why she couldn't sleep. What happened in that dorm during the semester ended our friendship. It changed her so completely that she was not the same person I had forged a friendship with at the beginning of our time in college. I always end this story with the conclusion that everything that happened could have all been in our heads, or that they could very well be a logical explanation for what happened, but I have yet to find it. We soon parted ways, but I was recently informed from a mutual friend that she still suffers from anxiety whenever it is dark. Sophomore year of my undergrad career, I took a class that was quite challenging, and 90% PhD students, because my dean suggested it, in place of a typical econ class. I thought it would be cool to be challenged by such a class, which I was, but I also had the unfortunate encounter with a PhD student who actively tried to ask girls to paint their faces. It was a very small evening class, maybe 10 of us in a small room. I'm very shy, and everyone was older than me, so I didn't talk to anyone at all. Very soon after the semester started, I got a Facebook friend request. It's one of the PhD students. I thought it would be useful to have contact in such difficult classes. He had different motives for adding me though. Note, we hadn't spoken or even greeted each other in real life. His first message to me read, "Quick, how do you feel about face paint?" I ask what he means, and he sends me some Google images from Day of the Dead face paint, as well as some Juggalo stuff. He then asks me if he can paint my face, and then sends a question mark. I don't reply for 20 minutes, and finally say, "I think I'll pass." He goes on to add, "Why? Sad face," and follows with, "Still no luck in the face department, sad face," a week later. So at this point, I'm actively ignoring someone that I have to be in a small room with 2 times a week. Maybe that sounds harsh, or like I'm being presumptuous, besides just trying to protect myself as a young woman. That's because at the same time, an app called Yik Yak was very popular for college students. It's basically a totally anonymous forum where people at respective campuses say anything they want. While browsing, I find a thread of someone complaining about a dude who was persistently asking to paint their face. A few other people join in the comments and say they've encountered the same person, and naturally, I join in the conversation. This leads me to find the dude is posting on the app himself as well. He is very tactlessly using the same account to both ask girls to paint their face and also impersonate girls and pretend to praise the great work he did on their faces. The weirdest thing I saw him post was a photo of some naive undergrad in the dorms with her face painted, and bragging about how they made out after he did it. This guy does not try to be subtle, and joins those incoming class Facebook groups asking freshmen if he can paint their face. At this point in time, he was infamous, and my friend told me about the posts in those groups. I should also mention that he was allegedly in a relationship the entire time he was posting in those groups. I would totally like to believe that this is some hobby of his that he genuinely wants to have an outlet for, but his behavior on Yik Yak suggests that it does something more for him. He also seemed to target young freshman girls, specifically, and in my opinion, thinks it comes off as innocent, when in fact it's not. I had a class in the same building later in my college career, in which he has an office, and I would hope with all my might that we would not meet again, knowing he was a huge weirdo who probably resented me. I used to work evenings at a movie theatre until late at night. Usually we would get off at 11, but some late night movies wouldn't end till 1 or 2 in the morning, so there were always cars in the parking lot. But a part of it would be open and illuminated by several streetlights, so it'd be easy to see someone standing in that area. One night I got off work and was sitting on the steps to the theatre, looking off into an empty parking lot and waiting for a relative to pick me up. We were texting back and forth, and he told me to meet him at a nearby restaurant as it would be easier to leave its driveway than the movie theatre, as it had different traffic. I got up and began walking. Part of the way over to the edge of the parking lot, I heard some stuff like ruffling or scraping. It just sounded like a shoe scraping along some gravel. I think it was just someone getting out of their car, but I never saw anyone pull up, and I'd been out there for some time. I turned around to see if I could help the person getting out. Considering I was still in uniform, I figured it could be someone asking me the time a film ended. I spun around, and there's some dude crouched amongst the row of cars. As soon as I turned around, he started quickly walking towards me all hunkered down. I've never sprinted so fast in my life. I didn't recognize them or know what their intentions were, but I didn't take any chances. A buddy of mine and I were exploring an old factory that was shut down for poisoning the water supply in the area 30 years before. The area was contaminated with lead, and the factory was left pretty much unchanged aside from being practically gutted of machines. Inside the maintenance/locker room area, there was a long hallway with doors and various rooms. It was pitch black inside, even in broad daylight. We navigated the corridors with flashlights, and the air smelled of mold and felt cold and damp. But the ground was dry and dusty. The lead paint was peeling off the ceiling. The thick flakes of paint looked like the room had been feathered. A lot of the flakes had fallen and were littering the floor, and they made a satisfying crunch as we crept through. Inside one of the rooms, there was a sliver of light bleeding out of an old double door and spilling into the hallway. Naturally, this caught our attention as we eased inside. The light turned out to be sunlight as these doors led outside. The room was their laundry room. I assume it was for uniforms. There was a huge dryer still in there that we ventured one of us could fit in. I volunteered and climbed in. To my surprise, it still spun freely as the bearings had remained in good health throughout the years. I braced myself and told my buddy to try and spin it. I wagered I could survive a few revolutions unscathed. We spent a few minutes taking turns spinning around in the big dryer. Being teenagers, this was as much fun as we'd hoped for in this creepy old factory. My turn had come around again, and just as I had begun to rock back and forth gaining momentum, I looked to my buddy for the extra push, but he didn't help. His demeanor instantly changed and he was pale, almost shaking like he'd seen a ghost. "Shh," he whispered in a panic. "What's the matter? Listen. Do you hear that?" I hurried out the dryer before coming to complete silence and lending an ear. From the pitch-black corridor comes a familiar sound from only moments ago. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was the paint chips on the ground getting crunched very slowly. Someone, or something, was creeping towards us in the pitch-black catacomb-like hallways of this decrepit factory. We'd been everywhere in the factory, and not a soul or even a small animal was to be seen. The footsteps did not slow down or speed up, but they were getting louder, and we both looked at each other in disbelief and utter terror. Who could this be? What could this be? Why are they sneaking up on a cacophony of creaking dryers and laughter in the pitch-black unknown? There was no time to entertain these questions. I turned to the double doors from where the sunlight was leaking and heaved myself onto them. They gave out an awful noise amidst the temporary silence and crackled off paint but didn't budge. My buddy joined in, and finally they began giving way. We resorted to kicking them for the final blow, and they burst open. I'd never been so happy to see sunlight, dead grass and rusty fences in my life. We bolted, never looking back, never going back, and never knowing what we would have encountered in that wretched, dark, and creepy corridor. Growing up, we didn't have a lot of money, and we didn't always live in the best neighborhoods. When I was 10, my parents got a great deal on this house that was in an okay neighborhood. They got a 3-bedroom, 2-bath for barely $100K, and for another 10, they got all the furniture inside of it. This kind of deal is basically unheard of in this city. The reason it was dirt cheap is because the current person who lived in it was 40 years old and mentally unstable, and had the mentality of a child. His parents died, in the house by the way. The dad had a heart attack in the living room, and the mother died in her sleep in the master bedroom. He was going to be put in a state care facility because he couldn't take care of himself. The guy took a suitcase full of stuff with him, and the rest was ours. This house was a fixer-upper for sure, and they weren't kidding about his mental state. This guy was a pack-rat borderline hoarder. The house had old cereal boxes that expired in the 80s, and this was the 2000s. There were 3 large garbage bags full of old mail, a mountain of pennies on the dining room table. If I had to guess how many there were, I'd say about $300 worth. There was so much dust and dirt, we thought the wall was beige when they were white. The grossest thing we found was in the garage. There was a whipped cream container that was halfway filled with cockroaches and cut in half. On top of that, the guy was a creep. Apparently he would sit in the dining room and count pennies for hours while staring at the next door neighbors through the window. They have small kids, and this freaked them out so much they put up a fence and a hedge. It took us 4 months to sort out the junk from the antiques and fix up the house. On September 11th, 2001, a year later, I was in 6th grade. I went to my first 2 classes like normal. When I got to my 3rd class, an announcement was made over the intercom, and every single kid in my class was to be picked up early except me. Me and the teacher had no idea what happened, why everyone left, and why I wasn't picked up too. The teacher let me use her phone to call my parents while she went to the office to find out what was going on. My mum was at work and didn't answer, and my dad worked nights, so he was at home in the day, and I just called my house phone. "Dad, what's going on? Everyone in class got picked up early." "What do you mean everyone went home early?" My teacher wheeled in a TV and puts on the news as the second tower got hit. "Put on the news! Something's happening! Please come get me!" "Hold on, someone's at the door." I hear my dad yelling at someone. It was hard to make out the words, and then my dad gets back onto the phone. "I can't pick you up now." "He's back." "Who?" "You know the guy that used to own the house? I gotta go call the cops." "What?" And then the phone went off. Being 11, I was terrified. To me, World War III was starting, and a crazy guy might be trying to kill my family. My dad never called back, and no one came to pick me up. When I finally did get home, my dad told me that the guy said that this was his house and that my dad needed to leave. My dad told him that this is his house and that if he doesn't leave, he was calling the cops. This triggered the guy to start screaming nonsense, hitting himself, and my dad locked the door and called the cops. When they showed up, he started yelling about how it was his house, that his mum was inside, and that my dad was kidnapping her, and that there was millions of dollars buried in the foundation and all kinds of things. All the cops did was give him a ride to the nearest bus station and tell my dad to file a restraining order, which we did. 6 months later, I'm 12, and my parents give me a house key and start letting me be more responsible and stay home by myself during the day. My dad got a day job, so from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., I was home alone. One day, I'm just getting off the bus, and I noticed this guy across the street, staring at me. I brushed it off, figured he was just a parent waiting for the kids to get off the bus. This goes on for about a week. On the last day, I get home, lock the door behind me, and put my book bag down, get a snack, watch TV, and then there's a knock at the door. I look through the peephole. It's the guy from the bus stop. I don't say anything. I don't do anything. I just watch through the peephole, completely frozen. He knocks again, and again, and again. "I know you're in there. Open the door, and this is my house." At that moment I knew who it was, and immediately called the police. As I'm on the phone with the cops, he starts losing it, hitting and kicking the door and the wall and screaming at the top of his lungs that this was his house and to get out. When the cops pull up, he walks over to talk with them, I guess thinking they would be on his side. Instead, they arrest him for breaking the restraining order. After that, he finally left us alone. This happened around a year ago, when I was visiting my grandparents. I was sleeping when I suddenly woke up. I wasn't wearing my glasses, but I was 100% sure someone stood in front of me. I immediately said hi, like it was normal. I thought it was my grandma, even though that would be weird too. Then I realized it was the middle of the night, and no one was in my room. Really weird. I never told anyone about it. I'm familiar with sleep paralysis, but I could move. I stood up, put the light on, grabbed my glasses, and no one was there. I think I was around 7, and was randomly playing on my own in my room with Legos. Then a weird orange-shaped thing sort of floated from my sister's room and went upstairs towards the attic. I, being a scared 7-year-old, ran downstairs. My mum believed me because she didn't think a 7-year-old could make up such a story. I went to school, told the story to some of my friends, and sometime later I was playing in my room together with a friend from school. And again, The orange-shaped thing floated from my sister's room to the attic. This time, I wasn't the only one who saw it. My friend did too. We were both scared and at once ran downstairs. We never saw it again for the remainder of the time that we lived in that house. This is from a good few years back, in my pre-barman days being a kitchen porter, so washer-upper and general dog's body. To give context, the pub itself is very old. The village had a notoriously flaky power supply, and the kitchen door had a thin glass window. On this particular evening, the power had gone out, but the emergency lighting was keeping everything roughly visible, and the landlord stuck his head out and said due to health and safety, he couldn't allow customers in the building without power, and once I'd finished washing up, or the hot water ran out, I could go home. About a half hour later, I see someone in what looked like a trench coat with a hood on go from the beer garden into the pub, and a few seconds later, I hear the gents' door open and close. Just the landlord cleaning. I finish cleaning in the deathly quiet, with the emergency lighting getting dimmer. I go behind the bar and press for the doorbell, for the flat upstairs where the landlord lived. As he comes down, I say, "Hey boss, all done. What were you doing in the beer garden?" "Yeah?" he replies. "Oh, I saw you go out and then come into the gents." "Nah. After I locked up and spoke with you, I went upstairs." So we checked the pub for intruders. Every door and window was locked. The only thing in the gents was the lack of any and all warmth that every other room had. The landlord asked about the guy, and I explained, and he said it wasn't a trench coat, but a robe. Turns out there used to be a priest hole in there from the Reformation, and I've never run home so quickly in my life. I am what I would most certainly call a creep magnet. I get weirdos all the time, and it's become a joke I share with my friends and co-workers, telling them of the many, oh so many creepers I've encountered in my time as a retail employee. I get all kinds of people in my store, and I'm known very well for my bright attitude and overall chipper way of being, which has come to be loved by my regulars and newcomers alike. It's more than likely a contributing factor as to why I get so many weirdos. And my height. I'm a very short girl, standing at 4'8" and looking about 5 years younger than my age of 21. I'm rather filled out for how young I look. That's another reason as well. But on to the story. Today was just like any other. Just another ordinary day working by myself in the store, checking out customers, stocking shelves in my moments away from the register. A normal day. At some point while on register, I greeted a man with a large dark beard, bald and wearing glasses as he came through the door. He immediately smiled and got that surprised look on his face that I've come to know as, "Oh shoot, I'm gonna totally creep on this girl today" look. No biggie, I'm used to it. I know how to handle myself. Eventually, after an hour or two of being on the register, I'd pretty much cleaned the store out of my customers and moved on to stocking candy. The man before with the beard approaches me with a smile and holds up a large, white trash can. Excuse me?" "Yes," I reply, glancing up from the box I'm stocking. "Are there any more of these in the back? This one doesn't have a lid." He says that and gestures to the large trash can in hand. "Oh, yeah, I can check that for you. I smile and am polite, like how I always am, before turning away and heading towards the stockroom. I notice he's following me and think nothing of it, but glance down the aisles for another customer as I walk. Immediately, I take note of the store's emptiness. Ah, damn, it's just us in the store, I think to myself. Moving through the stockroom door, I'm quickly relieved as this guy stops at the entrance. I'll be right back. I say that as I make a turnaround some full rolltainers, which due to just relieving a truck, our stockroom is full of them. They stand very tall and are like giant movable walls, but very big and heavy, mind you. So being small, I don't have to move them much to make a path through them and see what's on them. So after only a minute, I've made myself a little path, having 3 heavy ones on my right and left in front of me. I decide to give up on my search for trash cans. Sighing, I go to turn around and inform him of my defeat, only to find he's in my tiny path of walls, a very tight squeeze for a man of his stature, standing directly behind me. Find them? No, I don't think we have any. I try to laugh and avoid acknowledgement of the creepy situation, but so aware of my surroundings. I'm in a very small area with walls at my back and sides towering over myself, and this very robust man is standing in the way of my only exit, in a room very far from any customers, with no cameras and no other employees at the store. I'm helpless, and increasingly growing scared at how this man isn't moving to let me out. I go to voice that I need to return to work after a solid minute goes by, but I'm not able to get a single word before he says in this creepy, almost shy voice, "You're just the cutest little thing. Did you know that?" Within an instant, I'm scared and feel ill intention from this guy. Oh my god, this is how I die. Surprising myself though, I choke out without hesitation, "I just heard my bell." "What?" He looks confused and doesn't budge. "I just heard my bell. There are people up front who need to be checked out and are looking for me." I stand nervously, knowing full well neither of us heard the familiar ching from the service bell that I kept on the register. "But what about my trash can?" he asks, stepping forward but taking a glance back towards the trash can, and again, with lightning thinking, I blurt out, "I'll mark it down to half price. No big deal." Laughing and trying to act like nothing is out of the ordinary, I slip by him, seeing my opening at his turning around, and I try my hardest to walk away, pretending to be calm as I exit the stockroom, then sprint to the front of the store the moment I was out of sight. He wound up leaving without purchasing the trash can. So, creepy guy who I expect to pull something like that again? I hope you and I do not meet again. I am a 24-year-old male who was born and raised in northern New England. I grew up hearing all the scary stories and urban legends that haunted my dreams. But there was one local legend that everyone in my high school knew about: Monkey Town. Monkey Town was supposed to be a Christian retreat camp. You'd have to take this road in between a funeral home and a cemetery, down a big hill, and you'd enter what would look like the set from The Village, 2004. It was a big circle of old-style houses, with a big white church in the middle. I'll describe it a bit more later in the story, but it was always a dare to see how far you could walk down into the camp without chickening out. I remember a couple of times in middle school, a few friends and I made it halfway down the hill and chickened out. The year was 2011. It was junior year. I had just gotten my license on my first car, a classic Chevy Blazer. One night I was driving around with two friends, one who went to the same high school as me, and one who did not, Bessie and Kale. Bessie and I thought it might be fun to take Kale down to Monkey Town and see what happens. So the three of us hopped into my Blazer, and there we went. I remember putting on some of the instrumental music from Halloween to set the mood, and how dumb was I. As we got down the hill, mind you, we were in my car the entire time, we made our way around the circle, mesmerized by the entire community separated from society. One thing that stuck out was this red light at the top of the church steeple. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. That's when I remember thinking, no way. I quickly turned my head to my left, and I see a giant man in overalls running at full speed towards my car. The messed up part about this is that the man was carrying a bat or tool of some kind. I slammed on the gas, and we got the hell out of there. The three of us couldn't believe what had just happened. I'm pretty sure we just went back to my house to recover from the scare. We passed out, and all was well. The next day I was chilling with another friend, James, and his girlfriend, Sadie. I had told them about last night's events, and they were sure as hell didn't buy it. Me, a 17-year-old teenage boy, wanted to prove them wrong. So we all jumped into my Blazer and headed back to Monkey Town. This time my Blazer was full. We'd picked up two other girls who, coincidentally, had the same name, and another buddy of mine, Joe. I made James drive my Blazer as I sat shotgun. As we all headed down, the tension rose. We got halfway around the circle until one of the girls started screaming. This time, there were at least 5 men running at the car, and 3 of them definitely had weapons. James didn't know what to do. It's like he was frozen. The men were yelling at us to get out of the car. They were legitimately shaking my car back and forth, and I remember being crouched down so far in the seat as if that did anything. Finally, James slammed on the gas and peeled out of there. As I began taking all my friends home, I got a call from my mother. Apparently, 2 police officers were in my kitchen. One of the Monkey Town civilians had called the police and told them we tried to run them over. What bullcrap. I was furious. We raced home to my house to explain to the officers what actually happened. All in all, the cops really didn't have too much interest. No crime was committed. And to this day, I can't help but think what would have happened if we would have gotten out of the car. What kind of Christian retreat camp is that? Back when I was in Boy Scouts, I spent the night on an aircraft carrier. The staff in charge of watching us chose me and 3 of my friends to be on fire watch. I think they made it up, but we believed them. Our job was to go check the ship for any fires or any other dangers every hour. We went on one tour with them, and then they took us up to the break room. We spent the next hour watching some Indiana Jones. Then we did the next check. This cycled until around 3 a.m. At around midnight, they told us of the people that had died on the ship when it was in use. They said it had old surveillance footage of terrible stuff. Up until then, it was really fun. On this check, we were afraid. We approached a hallway and heard an odd noise. It sounded like a child. We were a little freaked out. Why would a kid be on the ship this late? We were on fire watch though, so we had to see what it was. We walked down some stairs and into the hallway. We had one flashlight between the four of us, and all the lights were off here, so everything that wasn't hit by our lights was pitch black. Hallways stretched down in every direction, but ropes cut off the ones that were closed. Along the way, there were mannequins everywhere. Each one made me jump as the light revealed its face. Then we saw the kid. He was sitting on the floor, crying. He was down a hall cut off by ropes. For 1 second I thought it was a ghost, but he started talking. He was 4 years old and with his dad for the night. He had to go pee but couldn't find the bathroom. He somehow got really far away. We took him back to bed and explained it all to his dad. Then we went back and finished the second Indiana Jones movie and passed out. It was a really weird night and still freaks me out. This was in the 90s when I was 15. My mum, my best friend and I were in Florida on vacation for 3 weeks. We discovered Sizzlers and really loved it, so we ended up going for dinner there quite often, and also got to know the waiters a bit. One night, we noticed a middle-aged man sitting at a nearby table, who was staring, and I mean really staring at me. He was with a young boy, maybe 5 to 6 years old. They had already finished their dinner, but the guy was just transfixed, completely ignoring this kid. He wasn't smiling or frowning, just a blank-faced stare. My mum was getting really uncomfortable, so she spoke to one of the male waiters who'd we become friendly with. I don't know what exactly she said to him, but I think it was basically to help keep an eye out. It might be worth mentioning that my mother is usually quite comfortable with confronting strangers if required, but something made her choose not to in this case. The guy and the little kid eventually left, though it took what seemed like an eternity. Once they'd gone, we were just relieved and carried on with our dinner. I think that we were there for at least another hour before we were ready to go. When we were getting into our car, I noticed another car parked a bit behind us with someone inside. It was the guy from the restaurant, without a kid in sight. Even worse, when we started driving, he started his car without his headlights on and began tailing us. We basically freaked out. My mom started driving in a different direction of the hotel as to not to lead him where we were staying. We drove around for a while before we eventually lost him and finally made it back to the hotel. My mom went straight to the front desk to inform them about what was going on and to keep an eye out. I'm not sure if she did end up contacting the police, but we were all glad to be safe. Thankfully, nothing else happened after that, other than a terrible night's sleep, but it was scary as hell at the time, especially because he seemed to have lost his kid and just waited for us. My best friend, myself, and 2 of our friends went out to her bachelorette party. My friend Anna and I are big paranormal fans, and we heard about this haunted museum. My best friend, the bride, gave us tickets to go. She and another one of our friends weren't going because they were afraid of those kind of things. Anna and I were excited. We go into the museum. It's dark and scary but amazing. It had so many wonderful artifacts, from Wyatt Earp to P.T. Barnum amazing artifacts. We entered this room where there was a cauldron that belonged to a serial killer. I was standing there. It is important to add that I hadn't felt anything at all in the museum, just a lot of fun jump scares and everything like that. Also, it's important to note, I carry with me at all times 2 charms blessed with white magic for protection. As I was standing by this cauldron, my midsection suddenly became ice cold. So cold, in fact, that I ended up wrapping my arms around my stomach. I felt so terribly uneasy. I suddenly felt like a man, a tall man. I kept picturing a man in my mind, and he was pissed that I was there. He was standing over me. The best way I can describe it is that he was standing right above my back and was leaning down over the top of me, just staring at me. You know, in the way a bully might intimidate you to give them something that they want. He wanted me to leave. It wasn't until after we left the room that we were informed that a witch who practiced black magic was in a room and she had performed a ritual in that cauldron. I was standing next to the cauldron with my white magic charms to protect me. I was not welcome in that room, and he made me know that I should never go back. 2. After we exited the cauldron room, we had seen so many other cool things, and I didn't feel anything for a long time. I wasn't feeling anything at all, actually. I was finally relaxing. I mean, there was some more jump scares, but it was all fun. This, though, terrifies me, just thinking about it. If you don't know what a Dybbuk box is, I would suggest you look it up, because it's too hard to describe. They did a movie called The Possession starring Jeffrey Dean Morgan, where it focuses on this object. Our tour guide had informed us that we did not have to enter this room if we didn't want to. Too many people had experienced terrifying things. Anna and I were feeling brave enough, because the tour guide informed us that it is behind a lot of protection and couldn't bother us because the doors to the box were closed. The Dybbuk box had been buried for almost a decade in a gold-cased box to protect the previous owner. The previous owner kept it buried until the museum owner bought it from him. Entering the room, it was like the other rooms, dark. There were writings in Jewish on one of the walls, and there was a donation box in the corner as an offering to the Dybbuk demon to keep it from following us home. By the right side of the room, there was a gold case that the previous owner kept it in, and in the middle of the room was the actual Dybbuk box. It was behind bulletproof glass. I had gone up to the glass, looking around, to see that there was sage and salt that was about 3 inches thick around it. I didn't think too much of it, and I kept going on with looking around the rest of the room. Even on the back of the box there was Jewish writing, which was fascinating, and suddenly Anna goes, "Hey Nora, look at all this sage and salt." I look over as she tapped on the glass and showed me the sage and salt. It was after this that Anna started acting weird. Anna kept staring at the box. Keep in mind there were at least 10 of us in the room, but we were all staring towards the wall. Anna was just walking around the box. She was fixated on it. She couldn't tear her eyes away. Seriously, I even said, "Anna, look at the gold box the guy put it in." She looks up for 2 seconds. "Oh, cool." Then she was staring back at the box again. She circled it at least 6 times. I thought she was in a trance. That's the best way I can describe it. Finally, our tour guide said it was time to go. Then I tapered her arm and said, "Anna." It was like after that, nothing had even happened, and we went into the next room. I will never forget how fixated she was on the box. If it had her attention like that with the doors closed, I'm terrified to think of what would have happened had the door been open. Finally, there is a room called the Demon Room, which will haunt me forever. We entered this room, and it had a set of basement stairs, dirt, and some kind of ritualistic items in a glass case. The room was lit up with blood-red lights, and there was a mannequin dressed like a demon in the corner. I was standing, not really freaked out, just looking at all the weird things that were in this room. We all had the daylight scared out of us, when one of the other visitors, who was drunk, fell onto the floor and the door flew back and hit the wall. It broke the tension in the room, even if it was just for a second. I was finally relaxed enough to keep us from stepping on the cursed dirt that was a wood rail. I was standing near a door, so I was good, 20 feet away from the stairs. I decided I wanted a closer look at this baby doll that was sitting on the stairs, so I walked to the rail. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like a dog growling underneath the stairs, like a warning for me to not come any closer. I literally said out loud, "This is my cue to leave." So I walked by everyone and left the room. After our tour, I told Anna I taste dirt. And I wasn't meaning anything. I was like, tasting it maybe. Perhaps there was a bit of dirt in the room, or the musty smell or something like that. Anna had brought a bottled water, and she gave it to me to wash the taste out. It didn't work. The taste went from dirt to mud, and the taste didn't leave for an hour and a half, and it felt like a warning. I was being warned that I was not welcome there, because my charms that are blessed with the magic for protection, and I was the only one that had that sensation of tasting dirt. So I believe maybe someone was too scared to say anything to me. I am a 20-year-old male from a town called Doncaster in the UK. This story happened a couple of weeks ago, when I had recently got into an activity called urban exploring, which, for those of you who don't know, is basically just exploring abandoned facilities and taking photos. This story took place on my first real experience of urban exploring. I had been looking on the web for places near me, as I didn't want to go far, as I was going to be doing it alone. After an hour or two of searching, I had found the perfect location. An abandoned mansion only a few minutes away called Ivy Manor Farm, which I was frankly surprised I'd never heard of before. A little backstory to the home. It was occupied until the late 1900s. I think it was owned by a male psychiatrist who departed the mansion after a foul spell in his career after releasing a woman who he believed to be sane. However, upon release, she stabbed and killed a girl in the local town. The backlash caused the owner to just leave the mansion intact to escape imprisonment. I'm not 100% sure about the details, but if you Google Ivy Manor Farm Hampole, I'm sure you'll be able to find the details yourself. Anyway, I decided I would go the following day, as by the time I had found the location, it was already pretty late, and I was tired. The next day, I decided I would go to the mansion at dusk, as the mansion is located alongside a main road, and I wasn't 100% sure on the laws of urban exploring. Around 7 p.m, I decided I would start the journey to the house. It was only a 15-minute drive, so I knew I would get there while it was still a bit light in the sky. About halfway through my journey while listening to the local radio, the heavens opened and the rain began to bounce off the ground. I just hoped the building still had a functioning roof. I pulled up to the mansion on time at around 7:15. Due to the rain, it was cast, and the plan of getting here during light was out the window. I pulled around the corner, and my car was out of sight from the main road. I sat in there for about 5 minutes hoping the rain would pass, but I had no such luck. The rain continued to fall, and I decided to brave the elements and get out of my car. I put my hood up and made my way around the corner to the house. As I got in front of the house, a convoy of cars made its way past, so I decided to wait until the last one, and then I jumped the fence, as I'm quite a paranoid person. I entered the house through the front door. The fixtures and fittings were old and broken, both due to natural causes and local kids, due to the numerous tags and graffiti that littered the walls. I decided to work my way from top to bottom, and I made my way up the cobblestone stairs and turned left, as the corridor to the right didn't look too stable. I entered a room that had a creepy feel to it, but I couldn't put my finger on what gave me this feeling, but I just marked it down to the fact it was the unknown age that gave me the feeling. The one weird thing I found about the roof is that it looked perfectly plastered and untouched, to say how long it had been derelict. I didn't want to go too far into the room, as I wasn't sure if the floors were stable, so slightly disappointed to the lack of interesting fixtures, I made my way downstairs to the rest of the house. It was pretty bland apart from the back of the house, as there was an abandoned swimming pool that was full of vegetation and rats. It almost looked like a scale model of a rainforest, and more deep in concentration of taking photos of the pool. A rhythmic and continuous sound came from the inside, and a feeling of what I can only describe as utter dread washed over me. The primal instinct of fight or flight came over me, and me, being a 6'2" stocky male, I chose to get the hell out of there, despite me not being able to find the car which I had seen on the internet. I made my way through the maze-like rooms until I reached the kitchen, when a sound started to accompany the clicking sound. It was laughing, but not your average laughing, but some psycho straight out of a movie type laughing. I started choking up, holding back tears, and looking down the doorway leading to the main room where the door was located. I could see a warm glow, and was both terrified and intrigued. I reluctantly edged round the corner through a small gap in the floor, and it was the only room I hadn't been to in the basement. Through the gap, I could see a single tea light candle flickering in the cool breeze that whistled through the house. Slightly relieved, as the house had now fallen quiet, I crouched down to see what was through the hole, and my blood ran cold, as in the cellar there was a man in nothing but a bathing costume, staring at the now dying candle. I jumped back and knocked an old gas canister, and suddenly the man span towards the stairway up to the room. It was at that moment that the candle must have gone out, from what must have been the air, as how fast the man span, and the house fell into darkness. I slowly made my way up, trying to make as little noise as possible, when suddenly I heard the chair fall over with force in the cellar. I bolted through the door and over the fence. Once over, I shot around the corner, got into my car and looked at the mirrors. I hadn't been followed. I was safe. So I started the car and pulled to the end of the road. Curious and somewhat stupid, I decided to turn left, which would lead me back to the front of the building. As I drive by, my hair stood on end, as there was a man in the doorway just waving. However, the worst thing was I also saw two men in the upstairs window leading to the room that I explored by myself. I really hope to not encounter those chaps again. When I was 13, I started modelling. I did fairly well, but I honestly hated the business. They were really strict about my weight. I couldn't get over 100 pounds in weight, or I'd lose my contracts. I couldn't dye my hair or have any piercings without permission, and they would often check to make sure I hadn't gone against their wishes. Fast forward 2 years of me being 15. One day I got an email from a fitness photographer. This wasn't uncommon for me to get random emails, because my agency would give my email out once they booked me on something. This was also about 12 years ago, and back then, I naively didn't worry too much about anything. You know the common teenage mentality of, nothing's ever going to happen to me. In the email, the photographer told me he'd like to do a shoot, and the compensation he promised me. I would have made more money than I have out of any other shoot, so obviously being money driven, I emailed him back and told him yes, I'd be interested. And he shoots me an email back after saying that he needed some sample photos of my calves, my feet, my backside and my breasts to make sure I had the physique he wanted. I was a little cautious, but I thought, he's offering a lot of money. I should probably do what he's asking or he's going to find someone else. And that's exactly what he wanted. He wanted me to feel the pressure to send him the pictures, and I did feel the pressure. Of course, I had it in the back of my mind that I shouldn't do it, but the money sounded so good. I sent the pictures clothed, and he said he couldn't tell my proper sizing, and I needed to send him nude photos. I declined this and told him I would be willing to set up a meeting and his assistant can take measurements, but I would not send nude photos over the internet. He set up a meeting but cancelled last minute, and a few weeks later, he was on the news. He got busted for indecent images of children, and shocker, he wasn't a fitness photographer. Who knows what could have happened to me had I actually gone to meet him. I never found out how he got my email. My agency said they never spoke with him. So creepy man, I'm glad you cancelled our meeting. I'm glad I never got to meet you face to face, and never intend to. I started bartending at this place, and all the employees said, "Don't close up alone," but would never tell me why. Fast forward 2 months and our doorman quit, so I was closing up the bar. It was about 2 a.m. and I was all alone. The doors were shut and locked, so I could clean and no one could slip in. After I finished cleaning, I started gathering my things and turning off everything. Games, jukeboxes, extra lights and so forth, and headed to the door, and music starts playing from the jukebox, which is clearly off. So I go, turn it on, then off again, and it fixes the problem. I gather my things again, and a golf game starts playing music. I thought the machine had just broken, so I go to the switch to turn it off. It's not plugged in. I instantly started sweating and moving towards the door. I left everything except my keys and phone. As soon as I get outside, I felt safer, but I knew I still had to get the bolt on the door before I could make my escape. It was an old, janky metal door that would stick, so I always kicked it to get it unstuck. Well, this night, as soon as I kicked the door, I slipped the lock on, and as soon as it clicked, something hit the door from the inside. I hauled ass to my car and drove away as fast as possible. The next day, I get pulled into the office for leaving the jukebox on all night. So I told my boss what happened, and we checked the security cameras so that you could see I turned it off, and you could clearly see the door jolt from the kick and then a second jolt. No one ever had to close down alone again after that. I have several paranormal stories from personal experience, but this one has me the most stumped. Backstory. I had never thought I had any previous UAP experience, other than 6 hours of lost time while viewing the night sky outside a small southwestern Iowa town to view the black moon on September 9th. I remember it was a Friday. I had met what I call at a potential maybe time at a library while looking for a book, and perhaps a movie to keep me busy. There is a lot to this encounter of this particular person which cost me dearly, but that was later. At the time, he made me laugh, purporting he was unattached romantically, and he was a contractor who worked for my real estate friend. I invited him to come look over some outside work I needed done. He was a native Cree in Spanish, and in need of sage, something I had in my entire raised bed in my herb section. He did a mini sage cleansing and asked me to join him, which I felt honored to do. As he was leaving, he saw my stacks of astronomy magazines and asked if I was aware of the black moon. I told him I was planning on watching it, and he told me he had planned on doing the same, and did I mind him coming back at 9:30 p.m. to watch it with me. Not really believing he was interested in me, or that he would come by, I said yes. I still didn't believe he would go, but I prepared to go on my own. As I was leaving and locking up the house, he was stepping onto my porch. I drove us to the spot on the outskirts where I thought we might have the best view of the night sky, and since I had just met him, parked in a parking lot where there was ample lighting. We spoke lightly of the town and ourselves, probably providing an hour's conversation. At that point I turned to the car to check the time, noting it was 11 p.m. Since a haze had developed, we decided to try closer to the river, where we may catch the end of the event. It was darker there, and it was also along the highway bridge between two branches of the river. It was a 5-minute or less drive from the parking lot to the river, and we stayed an additional 10 minutes, and our stomachs growled in unison. So we laughed, embarrassed, and made the decision, since we weren't going to see the moon, to pick up a sandwich at Casey's gas station and head back to eat them. We drove the grid, basically a square of highway that's 2 miles from where we got the gas station. Upon standing in front of the clerk to place our order, I noticed the clock on the wall and asked him if it was broken. He said it wasn't and that it was 4 a.m. I was gobsmacked. I nudged my companion and he was speechless with me. We placed our orders, paid, and made our way back to the car. I don't remember saying much to him, except asking him if he thought we had been out for that long. Was I imagining that time flew like that? Did I talk his ear off? I remember our conversation wasn't that deep, just surface and introductory. I remember periods of looking out the car window. I also cannot, and have not since my younger days, been able to sit for longer than an hour in the car, without taking breaks to answer the call of nature. He agreed he had the same issue, and he had eaten before coming to my home earlier. We finished our sandwiches in silence, and he walked the short distance home. We never did reconcile that time. However, we banded about it, primarily with a lack of discomfort in our bodies from sitting there hours, or a need to use the facilities. I have since recalled other situations. One, a dream which left me sobbing upon waking, which would have taken place 2 years ago after my daughter was born. She is 28 years older now, where her father and I were divorcing and clearing furniture out of the apartment. I was to meet him there, entering the apartment first, and in my dream, seeing a 4-year-old boy in the bathroom mirror, as I was splashing water on my face. The boy was out of place, and I thought it was a neighbour's child who followed me, if I had left the door open as I came in. This boy morphed into something else, his features changing back and forth from a little boy in a coat with sandy brown hair to something not human. He would smirk at me, and I pretended not to notice. I get a very heavy feeling in the area of my heart as I describe him. I became paralyzed as other people entered the room with machinery, an IV, AKG, and some others. I was given an injection, laid out on the bed, while these technicians, humans, worked with machines measuring my vitals and brain patterns. As they did so, a woman was lying on my bed next to me, touching my hair, saying that now I could remember who I truly am and who I was truly meant to be. They had me at different junctures of my life, chipping away at my hopes, dreams, intellect, whatever I valued about myself. They would come in and mind control me, for instance. Instead of being a psychiatrist, turn me towards a career in political science. I would be proud that I was healthy, with good teeth, and I would awake with all my teeth to be shattered in my mouth, all just to see how far they could remove me from my true path, true self-love and acceptance, only to erase my memories of what I was and what I am left with. I used to hold Shakespeare plays, names, dates, and when I turned 30, it was as if a light bulb went out in my brain, and I could no longer hold lyrics to songs I performed in years without prompting, and I begged them not to remove memories of my true self. They injected me anyway, smug as they were, leaving with no proof and no trace that they'd been there. I felt myself clinging to me. I awoke in such a state, not knowing if it were real or what reality was. It was a horrible dream. I had it earlier in the same year as the missing time. Recently, I remember at sundown on a farm we went to in Ashton country, seeing at sunset when I was 11, a series of what I thought were white jets flying dangerously close to each other, one on the hill adjacent to our farm, or for the sonic boom. There was no wind and no noises for them. Another experience was during the time my father was in Columbia, Missouri. My mother, brothers, and I were evacuated along with the rest of the town at 3 a.m. by men carrying suits, claiming to be the FBI, due to a gas leak, and we had to leave, but could return in the morning. There were trains which would take us throughout town. The line is closed now. Corn granary and some other storage tanks. Skelgers used to be there. We left our 80-year-old neighbour. Mary did not. She died of cancer a few years later. Odd coincidence. My father and several of his Sunday adult class either contract prostate or colon cancer within the next few years. Unfortunately, in my father's case, it was terminal. I was 12 when his evacuation occurred, and my father passed away at 40 when I was 17, and both my brothers were 16 and 12 respectively, leaving his widow, my mother, at 38, and had ovarian cancer, which she thankfully survived. This is 100% true. I'm 23 now, and this happened about 10 years ago, so I was probably 13 or 14. Anyway, I used to skateboard all the time with my friends Tim and Brandon. One day, we got done skating and we decided to go to 7-Eleven to get some food/drinks before we went home. Remember, I was fairly young, so wasn't driving. We had skated to the 7-Eleven and were planning on skating/walking back home. We buy our drinks, we leave the store, and we walk to the parking lot and prepare to cross the highway. Take note, it's not a busy highway since it's a small town. While we waited for the traffic light to turn red so that we could cross, I looked behind me at the 7-Eleven gas pump and noticed a 40 to 50-year-old man pumping gas into his white truck. He stared at me, and before I knew it, he dropped the gas pump and jumped into his truck. He slammed on the gas and sped straight at my friends and I. He missed us, but he grazed my arm and knocked my skateboard out of my hand. My friend Brandon screamed, "What are you doing?" as the man peeled out and sped into the parking lot next to 7-Eleven. I swear to God, he drove through a ditch which was between the 7-Eleven parking lot and the parking lot he was in and tried to run us over again. This is where it got bad. The three of us started running at full speed across the highway and towards the local library, which is about 2 to 3 blocks from the 7-Eleven. When we were about half a block away, I looked back and saw the maniac speeding towards us, full of rage. Brandon and Tim ran up to the library doors, and I ran towards the woods. It was Sunday, so I knew the library was closed, and there was a trail in the woods which led to my backyard. Meanwhile, this maniac peeled into the parking lot and hopped out of his truck. I looked behind me before escaping into the woods, and I saw him either grab a shotgun or a crowbar. I was pretty far away at this point, and my vision wasn't that great, not to mention I was freaking out. I ran all the way home, and when I got to my street, my neighbor, who was also Tim's dad, told me to get into his car because we had to go to the video store, which is where Tim's mum worked. When I got there, I found Tim and Brandon. They ran to the video store after realizing the library was closed, and 3 cops. A minute later, my mum came in, crying her eyes out, because Brandon and Tim told her they didn't know if I lived or not. Everyone had thought that I was captured. Tim told me that he saw the guy running after me into the woods, which is scary, because I thought the maniac was chasing them, not me. He was never caught, and I spent the next 5 years worrying about every white truck I saw. My town is small, but it's not empty. There were plenty of people around while this was going on. I felt so helpless running for my life, while there were at least 100 people around not doing anything about it. Also, to be clear, we didn't provoke this man at all. He tried to hit us for no reason, and that's creepy. Brandon called him a dick, but that was after he tried to run us over. We were good kids trying to walk home, and we almost got died/seriously hurt because of it. To this day, I have never felt so excited and frightened at the same time in my life as I did on the night me and my friends decided to visit a huge abandoned asylum. A few years ago, I was still a student at Newcastle University. Life was great, as me and my friends could pretty much do exactly what we wanted, and when we wanted. So this story started when a friend of mine had got a bit bored and had come across this abandoned mental asylum online. Situated in Mortis, St. George's Asylum was a classic Victorian-looking asylum with huge, extensive mazes of corridors and creepy rooms. There was a huge tower which loomed over the asylum, and it could be seen for miles, climbing out of a large forest at the top of a hill. God knows what had actually gone on at that place, but I am glad I only visited it as a curious student and not a patient. So one day after university, me and my friends had planned to go to Morpeth to check out the asylum for ourselves. We knew that a lot of it had already been demolished, and that development works were already being undertaken. However, this did not stop us, as I knew a significantly large area remained abandoned, and I had convinced everyone it would be worth it. Around 7 p.m, 3 of us set off to the train station. It was a short but pleasant train journey, as we could see Newcastle disappear behind us, and the view became increasingly countrified. As we arrived to Morpeth, we decided to grab some beers and wait until dusk before we made our entry. We had to walk out of the little town for about a mile before we saw a slip road surrounded by forests on either side. After a long climb up a very steep hill, we had arrived and finally seen what we had come for. This place was huge. The battered red brick complex of buildings were all interconnected and were surrounded by high metal fences. On these fences, I had noticed the severe warnings and patrol dog signs that were hanging on almost every available place along the fence perimeter. The asylum stood shamefully as it was being demolished by some development company, but we had spotted an access point about 100 meters away. We sat for a while in a nearby field and drank our beers until we picked up the courage to attempt an entry just as it was turning dark. We walked the perimeter until we found a gap in the fence, and without warning, we all sporadically just climbed through it and made sprint through the 100-meter gap between us and the asylum. We were heading for the smashed-out door that was clearly visible. We ran the distance as quickly as we could, through mud holes and piles of rubble, until we reached the opening and clambered through and up into the asylum. Looking back now, I realized that we had entered at a point which leads straight into the heart of the complex. The place was an absolute mess, with smashed cups and documents everywhere. Chairs stood alone facing back walls in rooms, and we could see where patients would have been living. The corridors were arched and went on for as far as the eye could see in almost every direction on the bottom floor. In some ways, it was a shame, because we knew that if we had gone about a year beforehand, there would have still been more than double what was currently left. Anyway, we continued to explore the labyrinth of corridors and rooms, but at the same time, we were beginning to get a little too comfortable. We had begun flashing our phones for pictures and making a fair amount of commotion. After a good 40 minutes of wandering, we decided we needed to go in order to catch the last train back. We were about to leave through the door we had entered through, and my friend noticed a light, which I had thought was coming from my other friend's flashlight. My mate immediately told my other mate to turn off his flashlight. It was at this exact point that our hearts began to sink to the bottom of our chests. When my friend turned off his, there was still a light coming from the end of the corridor. We were not alone. We decided to make a run for the nearest stairway and wait until the light went away. We all were absolutely crapping ourselves at this point, as the light was scanning across the corridor and was no further than 10 meters from us, right at the open entrance where we needed to go. I could barely breathe, as I knew people had been caught by patrol dogs at this place before. We stood there for 10 minutes, absolutely frozen. For whatever reason that night, The light stopped scanning and it began to fade away. If it was a security guard, we all knew that he had definitely seen us and had most likely decided not to pursue us. If we were scared, I could not imagine what the security guard must have been thinking or feeling. In a hospital of that size and state, I would be absolutely terrified to patrol it on my own. Shortly after the light had faded, one of my friends decided to make a run for it. Me and my other mate followed and made the 100-meter dash across the open land back to the safety of the outer fence. We could not see the flashlight anywhere, but I'm almost certain it was a security guard who could have had a massive patrol dog by his side. We did not look back and got the hell out of the fenced perimeter. Inconveniently, my friend had dropped his phone while running in the asylum, so we had to go back to the grounds to find it. He quickly found it, and we began to jog back to the station. We were all ecstatic, and did not stop talking about it for the next 3 days. It was by far the most excited and lucky I had ever felt in my entire time at university. Who knows what would have happened had we been caught. I work the graveyard shift at the wonderful Wally World. This means I see all the weirdos, drunks, and druggies. But this takes the icing on the cake. I am a 20-year-old female. I am by no means a big girl, but I'm a loner, and most people leave me alone. Hence why I work third shift. This night started as your average night does. Go to work, get told what to do, and start on it. This particular night, I happened to be in the baby section. I keep to myself and power through stocking, listening to some sort of documentary as I do so. That's when I get stopped by a man. He was older, so I asked him if he needed any help. He informs me that he's looking for a baby monitor for his wife. He doesn't know anything about them though. I walk him over to where they are and start looking at them and comparing specs. I even pull up online reviews trying to help him make a decision. He finally decides he'll come back up with his wife. I give him the "have a nice day" and go to walk away. This is when it starts. This man decides now, at 1 a.m, that it is the perfect time, and that I am the perfect person to pour his life story to. He tells me about how he is from Florida, and came up here to live with his mother because she isn't doing well. He tells me exactly where he lives, and then it starts getting even more personal. He tells me about how he builds all these expensive bedroom sets and furniture sets, and how he's really good at it. So good, he used to have his own company. But before that he was a manager at some other company that his buddy owned. The whole reason he left was because his wife was cheating on him. He wasn't mad about it though. He was just mad that she hid it from him. At this point, his wife leaves him for this guy, and he starts dating a girl half his age. The entire time he feels like she is familiar and has seen her before, but can never figure out from where. Well, he comes to find out that she was an adult movie star. She steals $1,000 from him and leaves. He ends it all by saying that he will never marry again. The conversation shifts again. He tells me about how he totaled his truck last week. It was raining and he was going too fast and slid off the road and hit a tree. He was really upset over it and didn't know what he was going to do or what kind of truck he was going to get. His truck was his baby. and now he will probably get some cheap thing, since he keeps wrecking his vehicles. He makes it very clear that he doesn't want something cheap because he's broke. Money isn't an issue for him, he just doesn't want to spend money. At this point, I want to point out I have done nothing to initiate this conversation and have not led to it at all. I have said maybe 3 words after I told him goodbye, and he keeps going on, even though I've added no commentary to the story. He also keeps edging closer and trying to touch me, which causes me to back up every few minutes and look nervously to my right where the doors to our back room are, and I keep seeing people walking in and out of it, hoping to catch somebody's eye, and they help me. Of course, nobody stops. My manager even sees this guy, and they don't stop either. At this point is where things start to get weird. He tells me he has cancer, but it isn't serious and he's not worried about it. He's more worried because his mum has cancer, and he doesn't want anything to happen to her because he's a mummy's boy, and he'd never had to pay for anything his entire life. He tells me that he was just arrested last month because his aunt set him up. She puts pills that weren't his into his truck and had him set up so he couldn't claim inheritance money. He then informs me that this isn't the only time he's been locked up. He spent 35 years in prison because of money stuff. At this point, I've been standing here for 45 minutes to an hour, and my friends are heading to lunch at this point to stop and grab me. As soon as he sees these 2 guys walking up, he instantly makes an excuse to leave. Once he's gone, I start to realize a few things. This man said he was 50. He went to prison for 35 years. That would mean he was locked up at 15 and just got out, making everything else he said next to impossible. Not only that, but he wasn't even married and didn't have kids. That's what freaked me out. I'm pretty sure he was as high as a kite as well. I hope I never see this man again. And now, if I'm late to lunch break, I've informed to people to make sure I'm okay, just in case he comes back to look for me again.